Welcome to Arctic Aurora LifeScience and Arctic Aurora Biotech Select monthly update for July 2021. July has been a mixed month, but it has been largely dominated by the spread of the more contagious Delta mutant and the implications that might have for global economies. Unfortunately, we have also seen an increased number of infections in fully vaccinated individuals. And that has, of course, increased and added to the uncertainty of when economies can reopen again. For the life science sector, this has also had implications. And of course, on the back of this, the mRNA corona vaccine companies have soared basically during the month. July is also a month for Q2 reporting, and in summary, we would say that the large pharma companies have presented fairly strong Q2 reports, and we will comment on that later on. For the small cap segment, however, for the SMID biotechs, they have had a bad month, and they, as a subsector, seems to be out of favor from general investors, and the recovery that we saw in June has been erased during July. And that has also impact on our funds. So the fund performance in July has been negatively impacted by this weakness of the SMID biotechs. So that's the month in a nutshell. So the agenda today would be that we comment on the sector sentiment and the fund performance. We will talk about the contributions, the top contributions and the bottom contributions, and also we will discuss some other news in the biotech sector during July. Start like we normally do and show this graph. The green curve is the Nasdaq Biotech Index, the blue is the large pharma, and the black is S&P. And as you can see here, both pharma and biotech is year-to-date lagging the general market in the S&P. We can look also at the Nasdaq Biotech Index, the green curve, and there you can see what I mentioned, that June was quite strong for biotech. However, in July, it's been less strong, and large pharma has actually outperformed biotech during the month of July. This has to do with the small cap part of the biotech sector, as I mentioned in the beginning. And the violet curve here is an index where the small companies has a larger impact. So you can see that the violet curve is showing the development for the small mid cap, basically. And there you can see that July was a weak month for those companies. And looking into detail, they have that curve has underperformed the Nasdaq Biotech Index quite significantly. And it seems like, as we mentioned, that this segment of the market has been very much out of favor. And we have been discussing internally why. And it's not really any big specific reason, but we believe that the ongoing debate around Biogen's Alzheimer's drug might cause some uncertainty among investors, and we also saw some disappointing news from the biotech companies, but not really big significance. So it's really a lack of sentiment right now for the small mid-cap stocks. The Nasdaq Biotech Index, the green curve, has kept up quite well, and that is because it's dominated now by Moderna as one of the mRNA corona vaccine companies. And we will comment on that more later on. So the performance of the funds during July, you can see to the left, we have the performance of Arctic Aurora LifeScience since inception. And also we have staples showing month, year to date, and the last 12 months. And as you can see for Arctic Aurora LifeScience, we were almost up 1% during July, but as I mentioned, the small cap part of the sector has been weak, and that impacts our relative performance. So we were lagging index during July in Arctic Aurora LifeScience. The Arctic Aurora Biotech Select, you can see on the lower part of the slide, and it has just been started, so it's just like 6 weeks, but the same pattern here, that we, due to the holdings in the small mid-cap segment of the market, where we have slightly more than Nasdaq Biotech Index, we are lagging. And this is the contribution I'd like to show you. So the contribution, the top contributions during July for Arctic Aurora LifeScience comes from Moderna, the mRNA vaccine company. It has had a fantastic run during the month. It's up 54.5% from already a strong level. And then also it's dominated by large pharma companies, and I will comment more about that later on. If you look at top contributors in Arctic Aurora Biotech Select, you can see almost the same picture. It's dominated by Moderna, but in this fund we also have a bigger relative holding in Biotech. That is the mRNA company that has a deal with Pfizer. And then we have other companies, slightly bigger biotechs. And as I mentioned, the mRNA corona vaccine companies, Moderna and BioNTech, due to this focus of the spread of the Delta virus and the question whether we would need to take boosters and if we ever will get this pandemic situation past, those stocks have now rallied tremendously during July. The green curve is BioNTech and the blue is Moderna. And so that is the underlying situation causing the top contribution to the fund. The other important value driver was the large pharma segment. And as I mentioned, in general, the reports that they presented were quite strong. They met or exceeded expectations. And also here, Pfizer stood out with a strong quarter that was fueled with COVID vaccine sales and a strong momentum for that stock. So I'm leaving the word to Daniel to comment on the bottom contributors.
Thank you, Ulrika. So last month when I took over, it was all smiles from the small cap biotechs, with a lot of CRISPR news and a lot of stocks going skywards. And as Ulrika alluded to, this month was quite the opposite. So I'll take over with the bottom contributors because they are solely small mid-cap biotech sticks this month. We've had some news in some of these companies, but we should also be aware that many of these movements were not caused by any fundamental news. We will mention some of these. We'll mention Albreo, and if we look at the bottom contributors for Biotech Select in the next slide, we'll see, for example, Denali, that also had some clinical news, and Arrowhead that we'll mention. Axum, on the other hand, are awaiting an important regulatory decision in August. And I think perhaps it was on the back of the pullback of CNS stocks, central nervous system stocks, due to, let's call it, the Biogen controversies around Alzheimer's that contributed to some of these companies' downward movements during the month. If we switch to the next slide, and this is actually Albreo, and we wanted to bring up this news because it wasn't a big stock mover. In fact, Albreo moved down with general small cap biotech companies this month. But in terms of novel treatments where we have high unmet medical need, this is an important milestone. So we've followed and owned Albreo for a long time now, to begin with in the LifeScience fund. And finally, we got approvals both in the European Union and in the US 2 days consecutively here. for a rare liver disease called progressive familiar intrahepatic cholestasis, or PFIC for short, caused by a buildup of bile acid in the liver, a congenital disease, which is quite devastating. It affects children, and many do not live into adulthood unless they get a full liver transplant. And we saw in the preceding clinical trials, phase 3 trials, that Albreo could significantly help these patients. About 15,000 patients are suffering from PFIC worldwide. 100,000 patients are suffering from similar diseases caused by high bile acid level buildups that Albreo and another company called Mirror Pharmaceuticals are also targeting in their clinical trials. So important for patients here. That's the key point. Moving on to another company that didn't do well, and I think was more sort of fundamental, was Arrowhead and their clinical trial halt in cystic fibrosis. So Arrowhead deals with RNAi drugs, been a successful mechanisms or treatment type that has emerged with companies such as Arrowhead, and then Alnylam and Dicerna now actually have approved treatments on the market that basically silences genes. So Arrowhead tried to take this from liver diseases, where RNA has succeeded quite significantly so far, to lung diseases, where we actually seen previous failures with RNAi historically. And unfortunately, it looks like we're heading this direction with cystic fibrosis as well for Arrowhead's program. For now, it's possible to see if there'll be any resolution here, but obviously market didn't take this very mildly, and the stock dropped 26% on the news. And we should note that Arrowhead has several programs in clinical development now, particularly in cardiovascular diseases and other rare diseases. So it was quite a big drop, that this one project, which beforehand was a high risk project, because we all know that RNAi's strength has not been in respiratory diseases. And actually, some of the drop actually was reversed during the month. It at least climbed 10% during July, and their breakthrough designation in one of these rare diseases called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency actually probably helped there. But still, Arrowhead was one of the bottom performers of July. So if we switch to the next slide, we go into the reports, and I think biotech in general sort of follow the pharma here for the companies that are selling products, have product revenues, or are cash flow positives, like the big pharma guys. Seagen, an emerging, perhaps large biotech company, had a particularly good quarter. We also saw good developments from the likes of Alnylam, that also has a growing franchise, again in RNAi, by the way. For larger caps, it was slightly more muted. Amgen doing fairly well. Gilead, a little bit sort of off and on. Some parts of Gilead are growing, whereas the large HIV franchise, that's where I think the market sees some dark clouds ahead, and so reactions to Gilead was a bit muted. Biogen important, because obviously they had this huge approval last month, but since then the stock has dwindled, and this is due to questions whether or not Biogen will be able to charge as much as they have hoped for this Alzheimer's drug. To begin with, they actually restricted the label during July from the one that FDA set out. So now the only the only patients that will be treated with Aduhelm, the new Alzheimer's drug, will be those with mild or moderate and relatively newly diagnosed Alzheimer's patients. That in itself limits the market for Biogen here. But as far as financial reporting, there's actually no focus at all on the existing products for Biogen. Aduhelm is a very dominant factor here. But as we mentioned, that may have impacted other CNS companies and other perhaps growth stocks as well within CNS. So if we move to other events, just mentioning Denali here, another CNS company that had early stage data presented in a rare disease called Hunter syndrome, or MPS II, that were kind of mixed. And we saw a 15% decline on the day and 35% on the month, which is quite a big movement, of course. But in large, yes, data wasn't, a home run, and add to that the CNS uncertainties, and add to that the biotech uncertainties that we see in the market right now. I think that resulted in the big share drop. To put it in perspective, though, if we combine June and July performance for Denali, they're only 10% down. So it is you could call it a temporary blip for now. We'll see how that develops. Good news, of course, is in biotech with Arrowhead, and this is an exciting new treatment paradigm where you artificially help the body to get rid of proteins that may cause disease, in this case cancer. It's almost parallel to RNAi, but on a protein level. So you help the body degrade proteins, and this is what Arrowhead are doing. They're focused on breast cancer and prostate cancer initially, and Pfizer thought this was really good. Obviously, they paid in total $1 billion upfront for a 50-50 split on Arrowhead's breast cancer drug globally, with potential 1.4 billion in additional milestones that will regarding regulatory progress and commercial success. And we saw a significant uptick in Arrowhead this month. We should just briefly mention also there have been some controversies in Chinese listed, the so-called ADRs, Chinese companies that are listed in the US for regulatory reasons from the Chinese government side. And we do have smaller stakes in some of these companies, Beijing and Scilab, to be precise. Those were affected by this. Obviously, it was a larger blip mid-month when these concerns rose, when we saw the news break, and then it recovered as it appears that we won't have any sort of draconic regulations from the Chinese side. But still, it was a negative impact on those stocks. And for the LifeScience fund, we should also mention Dexcom. So it's a fairly odd company. We do have a few medtech companies in that portfolio as well, and they are performing quite well as a group. And Dexcom in particular are doing well with their new glucose monitoring system, and their quarter report made that stock move quite significantly, 21% during July. So they're doing quite well, and medtech as a subsector are doing quite well as well during these times. So I think on the backward-looking side, that's it. If we move to the next slide, which is the forward-looking ones, some interesting data sets. We mentioned Exome as one of the worst performance during July, but they have a big decision where we have seen very little progress made in antidepressants of late. We had I think we can dare to call it a failure from Sage and Biogen during June. And Axsome has presented very compelling data in major depressive disorders, so it'd be interesting to see FDA's decision there. More actual data from Arrowhead, more high-risk projects from Arrowhead, not their established rare disease or cardiovascular disease projects, but from their oncology side. That would be quite interesting to see if RNAi can make a difference there. Apellis also got an approval last month, and we'll see if their drug can target an eye disease called geographic atrophy. So that's a potentially big market for Apellis if that were to work there. And on the medical conference side, we have the first big medical conference of the second half of the year in the European Society of Cardiology, and we have several companies that will probably be involved in that conference. So more on that perhaps on the next video. So I think with that summarizes July fairly well, we hope. Thank you for watching. See you next month. Bye.
Bye.